This is your friendly neighborhood author, Jonathan, and you are listening to Season 4 of the Floor Rejects podcast, The Wells House Phenomenon. Okay, here we are, back at the Floor Rejects podcast for Chapter 2 of the Wells House Phenomenon. I am your friendly neighborhood author, podcaster, maybe just writer for right now, also insurance appraiser, Jonathan. That's me. And let me give you a brief synopsis of Chapter 1 before we get into what we're covering today, which is Chapter 2. In Chapter 1, we meet Warren Wells. He's kind of this runaway rich kid who finds out that his grandfather has passed, comes back home, has to attend a funeral and wake in the same day, and also is met by a strange and mysterious lawyer who tells him not only that his grandfather passed, and passed with no one around, but also that his grandfather left him in charge of the Wells Manor, or the Wells House. It's kind of interchangeable, and that he was now the caretaker of it and would be receiving $550,000 a year in perpetuity just to live at the house and make sure that it didn't fall down. In addition to that, we also learn a bit about who his grandfather was, Bartholomew, as well as his mother, a little bit about his father. They both suck. And just a little teeny tiny bit about how much Warren really does not like his family. With that said, let's get ready for Chapter 2. Alexa, it's podcast time. Chapter 2. Introductions. He left his car at his mother's house, parked behind a small shed way out in the pasture that no one ever paid attention to, the keys in the desk on the study, and had Roz drive him to the airport. She'd always been kind to him, and he told her where the car was, and asked her just to make sure it wasn't stolen. He didn't care about it, but it wouldn't make it to West Virginia, and it would be very annoying to deal with a stolen pile of junk several states away. He told her if anyone wanted it, that she had his permission to sell it and keep whatever money she could get for it, and she agreed, only because she didn't have much choice, as uncomfortable as that made her. She'd overheard Mrs. Wells on the phone to her sister the night before, and from what she had heard, Warren was the unknowing sole head of Wells Industries, and if Mr. Fitz had let on to that fact, the entire family could be left without a penny if Warren felt untoward towards them. So, Mrs. Wells had asked Fitz to keep it a secret, and because nothing had been officially transferred to Warren, it was kept secret, unknown to anyone but the two surviving sisters, Fitz and Rosalind Adams, who didn't say a word to anyone, as much as she did want to warn the man next to her, because she still saw him as the mistreated little boy she had cared for in years long gone. Warren, completely unaware and in bliss at the idea of having an entirely new life to live without any traditional tether, sat in the car next to her, daydreaming about what his new life would be. His first order of business when he arrived would be to hire a moving company to pack up his old apartment and ship it to him, then figure out how much money was needed to keep the house going, and then maybe buy things like a car, some furniture, or whatever incidentals he thought he would need. The ticket had been purchased before he'd arrived by Mr. Fitz. He found it in a file on his bed when he'd gone up after all the guests had left. His mother hadn't even bothered to ask him what the meeting was about, or to talk to him at all, as soon as the house was empty again. So he went to his room, like he had so many times as a child, and pretended that his mother didn't exist, and that instead he had a mother more like Roz, who had come to check on him before she went to her room that night. The ticket was first class, and the flight, albeit short, was the most relaxed that Warren could remember feeling in years. He hated to admit it to himself, as a self-proclaimed socialist, but money seemed to have solved all of his problems at once. He'd spent the 9 years since he'd left home trying to escape his family, and all the problems he thought the money had caused, but he thought he understood now that the money hadn't caused the problems, his family just had. When he touched down in Charleston, he didn't have any bags to claim except for his backpack that he brought as a carry-on, so he went straight to the rental agency, picking up the keys to a prearranged vehicle, also specified in the file for him. The standard silver Chevy sedan he climbed into smelled of Armor All and sweat, and so he took the 2-hour drive with the windows down for the most part, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his skin, the air just warm enough that he didn't arrive to Elkins with his teeth chattering. The town was minuscule compared to what he was used to, with towering Victorian houses lining several of the more prestigious streets, and small boxy houses not unlike those of Paisley scattered throughout town as well. He drove through the town square, admiring the preserved architecture, looking up and down streets, gawking at the locals, most of whom thought he was just another strange out-of-towner, and ignored him. The GPS in the rental was blaring at him, as he had the address of the manor itself already inputted, and so he followed it, a small bit of unease growing in his stomach, nerves, he realized. He made his way what felt like 1,000 turns, rolling in and out of hairpin curves, eyes flitting to and from the dashboard screen. As he drew close, the navigation system began to malfunction, the black lines running across it, the display shrinking and bouncing off screen erratically. Warren slaps the dash, groaning as he turns onto Adams Street, at the end of which he was pretty sure his new home sat, according to what he remembered from the map overview. "Piece of shit domestic," Warren grumbles as the screen goes completely black. He notices that there's no other driveways, no mailboxes, or signs of life on the street. In fact, the road itself at first appeared to be in disrepair, riddled in potholes and overgrowth. As he progressed, though, and the main gate came into view at the base of a huge swell in the earth, suddenly the road smoothed out and the in-dash screen lit back up. It no longer showed the map, but instead loaded quietly and back up with music as it came online. "The room where you sleep" filters quietly through the cabin as he rolls the windows down, staring at the panel and trying to remember what the gate code was. He couldn't recall and looks at the papers in the passenger seat, finding the code scrawled at the top edge of the page. He punches in the code: 6636196. And the gate doesn't move for a moment, but just as he reaches out to punch the code in again, he hears the mechanical groan of the gates, the panels jerking and stuttering open, clouds of rust falling off of them onto the car's hood. Warren rolls the windows up quickly, accelerating through the entry just as the gates snap back towards the car, closing much faster than they had opened, sealing him in with a loud clang. He winds his way up the drive, wondering when he would actually see the house, as he drove for about 1/4 of a mile up the hill with no house in sight. What he could see, though, was impressive. The expansive lawn, which covered the entire space he could see on the side of the rise, was neatly mowed, row after row of straight, perfectly spaced cut marks sweeping across both sides of the road, wrapped carefully around perfectly pruned trees, large ornate urns dotting the edge of the path, overflowing with flowers and small shrubs. As he crests the hill, his new home comes into sight. The manor is gargantuan, with rows of large, shuttered windows running its length, a huge 2-story entrance in the center of the rectangular structure, a giant screened-in porch to one side, and a Versailles garden to the other. Between the Versailles garden and the house itself is a parking area, and Warren heads towards it as he spots his grandfather's truck and trailer parked in the gravel square. He hops out, momentarily forgetting that the man was dead, and that in fact the truck and trailer now belonged to Warren himself. He pulls on the handle and the door opens, its perpetual creak reminding Warren of better times. Stepping up and into the trailer left Warren immediately out of breath from the nostalgia and heartbreak that struck him. It was just as he remembered it. The outdated tan and orange patterned wallpaper, the matching seat cushions and cream-colored lino countertop. He felt like a kid again. The bed, which doubled as the kitchen table/bench during the day, was, to make a hard reality even harder, still unmade. Likely from the day his grandfather had died. The comforter was the same as he remembered, a patchwork quilt of red and tan, much more threadbare now, and he sat down heavily on the bed, feeling more broken than he had at the funeral when he laid an empty casket to rest. He can smell his grandpa's aftershave, and when he grabs it from the shelf above the bed, he can feel tears coming to his eyes, his cheeks burning as he takes in shallow breaths, fighting the urge to break down, so close to the man he had missed for years, and too late. He stands, walking out of the trailer before he can completely break down. Looking through the truck window, he sees the keys are still in the ignition, and wonders why no one thought to do any cleanup, or at least making sure the truck wasn't stolen. He makes his way up the path from the parking area to the front door, fishing his own keys from his pocket. The keys to the house look surprisingly normal, and when he turns it in the lock, the door begins to open almost autonomously, the deadbolt the only thing holding it closed. "Hello?" he calls out, stepping into the largest room he had ever seen in a house before. It dwarfed the entrance hall at his family home, and the ceiling was so high, extending the full 4 stories to the house, that he couldn't see in the dark. He searched around for a light switch, groping the walls until his hand finds a small, old-fashioned button switch. When the room illuminates, it's almost as if it shimmers, rendering into focus after a moment. The hall is flanked on either side by a sweeping staircase. On either side of that leads up to a second floor, with each floor above open to the grand room over an ornate carved cherry railings. The walls are in rich, deep, smoky paintings, sculptures, and sconces with flickering orange bulbs. He looks to his left to see a hallway leading into darkness, sheets draped over each window, and to his right is what appears to be a sitting room, with another hallway leading through an arch into the depths of the house. "Hello?" he calls again, to no answer. Timidly he walks into the sitting room, each step accompanied by the creaking floorboards, running a hand over the sheet covering a large couch. All the furniture is covered, crisp white sheets around the room like so many ghosts. The sheets over the windows block out any light that might have filtered through, and instead of searching for the switch, he pulls at the sheet on the closest window, willing it to come down without a fight, but it remains caught. He pulls a bit harder, but the fabric only burns his palms as he slides backward. "Damn it!" he hisses, balling the fabric in his fist, gearing up to tear the fabric if he had to. He raises his hands, sheet clasped in either one over his head, and pulls down hard, throwing his body forward. The sheet doesn't budge, and he bounces off of it, falling backwards, knowing he was in for a world of pain when his head smacked the couch arm or the floor. As he braces internally for impact, disembodied hands wrap around his biceps, reversing his motion roughly, spinning him in the dark room. Gradually, as if his eyes were adjusting from blackness and not just a dimly lit room, a man comes into focus, and Warren leaps back. He was sure he had been alone just 1 second ago. The man doesn't move, only points up at the window. "They're tacked in up there. Pulling won't do you any good," he says, his gravelly voice not matching his appearance. He was maybe a little younger than Warren, but he couldn't be sure. He had pale skin, arms thin but sinewy, obviously conditioned by hard labor. His eyes were light, a sharp, innocent blue, but with an intense and knowing look. His blonde hair was tousled messily about his head, and he wore faded blue jeans and a dirty white t-shirt tucked into them. His small, upturned nose and thin, upturned lips made him look youthful and friendly from the eyes down, but from the eyes up, he looked thoroughly disenfranchised. "Oh, sorry," Warren mutters, hoping the man doesn't see him blush in the dim lighting. "It's no problem, Mr. Wells. We're glad you're here," he says, his tone devoid of any sentiment. It's so dark in here, and no one answered, so I was just exploring. You can call me Warren, by the way." Warren introduces himself, and the man sticks out a hand, shaking Warren's roughly. "Thomas. It's nice to meet you. I do the yard work and any repairs around the house, and my mother—" The man is interrupted. His voice silenced as a more sultry, purring voice comes from a doorway opposite the two men on the opposite side of the room. "And his mother takes care of the needs of Well House and its residents," says a woman, seemingly appearing from nowhere as Warren had been looking in that spot just a second ago, leaning on one shoulder against the doorway, arm tucked beneath her breasts. Her hair is fiery red, shining brilliantly even in the dark room, and laid loosely curled over her clavicle. She isn't wearing any sort of uniform. In fact, neither of them were. Thomas wore a pair of baggy faded jeans and a stretched-out stained shirt, and the woman was only wearing a silk dressing gown, a dark maroon color in the dim room, covered in an intricate floral pattern. Hi there. I'm Warren, and you are?" he asks, the hairs on the back of his neck rising up as she pushes off the wall and walks towards him, her bare feet silent on the floor. "Lila. Excuse the house and my attire. We were inspecting you until this evening," she purrs, extending a limp-wristed hand to Warren, who looks at it confusedly, shaking it to what almost looked like dismay on her face. "Well, Thomas, Lila, it's nice to meet you guys. Well, I wasn't given much information by Mr. Fitz. He kind of just threw the papers at me and ran. Is there anything, anything I need to do for the house right now, or you two? Anything I need to know? Warren asks, a little bit unnerved by the dynamic of the duo in front of him. Lila speaks, both rows perfectly straight and white, and leans against the couch. Thomas steps back behind her. There's a lot you need to know, Warren. This manor is a special, special place. Do you mind if we reconvene in a couple of hours, once we have the house spruced up and I have a chance to get properly dressed? She asks, pulling at the edges of her robe, running her fingers up and down the sleek fabric. Warren leans away from her, nodding his head as he swallows his unease. Lovely. Absolutely lovely. We will meet back here in 2 hours, and Thomas and I will give you the lay of the land. Have you had a chance to explore Elkins? There's a lovely diner in town. Maybe you could grab some lunch. We will, of course, have meals and everything prepared from here on out, she says, and Warren, eager to get out of the stuffy house and away from the weird tension he'd stumbled into, agrees before quickly jogging back to his rental. He leans against the hood, unaware that as he stood in the drive trying to pull up his phone browser and figure out how to get back to town, Lila stood in a third-floor window, staring down at him as his car wound back down the drive, her red hair glowing around her head and a faraway look on her face. When Warren pulls off of Adams Street, his car and phone reconnected to the internet, and quickly he navigated himself to a McDonald's on the edge of town, opting to eat in the peace and quiet of the car. He watched as people rolled by in their vehicles, in this small town where it seemed like everyone knew everyone. He could tell he would never fit in. He knew there were a couple of things he needed. He needed a car of his own, because he was sure his grandfather's truck wasn't suitable for long-term travel anymore. He needed to return his rental, which he thought, after a moment, he could probably ask Lila or Thomas to help him with. He also didn't have any clothes except for what was on his back, and he was sure from the state of the place he would need some upgrades in terms of internet and TV. As he tossed his empty wrapper into the bag on his floorboard, he decided the first thing he would purchase was a vehicle. He'd already received his first payment, and he hated his rental car. He searched for the nearest car dealership, hoping for a selection to populate his phone screen, but found only one, down the main highway he was on. He drove there quickly, stepping into the showroom with a sense of entitlement and power that only the money he hadn't earned could inspire in him. He took inventory around him, seeing the gleaming trucks, their massive wheels speaking to the type of person with something to prove. The sporty, domestic Chrysler in the corner, and just as the salesman, Rodney, embroidered on his polo, approached him, he spotted what he was interested in. "Hi there, young man. What can I do you for?" Rodney asks, following Warren's gaze. He was staring at a firecracker-red Jeep Wrangler, glinting in the sunlight, its doors removed and headlights blacked out. The pride and joy of the lot. It's quite the stunner. What are you looking to spend? That one's pretty pricey. I can show you some more approachable models," Rodney says. Warren looks sharply at the short, balding man and smiles. He was fighting the urge to act like a spoiled rich kid, and nods, calming his expression. He allows Rodney, who was nice enough, if not a bit too presumptuous, to show him all manner of other, less flashy vehicles. But once Warren had an idea in his mind, he couldn't shake it. He turned down every single one, until he had returned to the entrance of the building with Rodney, who was now sweating and dabbing at his brow in the afternoon sun. "Nothing tickled your fancy?" he asks Warren as they step back into the showroom, both of them sighing at the cooling relief. "Just that one," Warren says, pointing back to the Jeep. "Son, that Jeep is $75,000, Rodney says, expecting Warren to react, faint, or laugh. Instead, the younger man shrugs, walking towards it, holding in his drool as he looked at the massive touchscreen, the brilliant paint, and impeccable leather. He had to keep in mind, it was still just a Jeep. "Draw up the paperwork, Rodney. I think that's a bargain," Warren says in a way that would charm anyone in or like his family. Rodney, obviously a bit more salt of the earth, laughs, but stops quickly as he sees that Warren is not joking. Within 45 minutes, Warren has paid, in full via wire transfer, for the Jeep, and Rodney is beside himself. He finishes up the last of the papers, looking up at Warren with a bit of wonder. "Mr. Wales, what is it that you do? I just have to fill in the occupation section, he asks. Warren ponders this for a second, unsure how to respond. I'm the owner of Wells Manor, he says, and Rodney makes a small sound, looking over the desk as he readies all the paperwork in their sales packet. Where's that? Is it like a B&B? Rodney asks further. It's a long story, but I own it and I get paid to own it, Warren says, and he can see Rodney's face darken with jealousy. Interesting, he says, and hands Warren his fobs. Warren looks at them for a second before handing them back. Can you have it delivered? I have a rental car to return first, and it's just me, Warren asks. He can see Rodney swallow a scoff, nodding and being polite to keep his commission. Can you do tomorrow? He asks Warren, who nods. Good. We will call you when the driver's on his way, he tells Warren, who thanks him and walks back out to his rental. He had about 30 minutes before he needed to meet Lila and Thomas, and so he took his time on his way back to the manor, enjoying the smell of the fresher, less clogged air of the small community he was now, at least peripherally, a part of. As he drew close to the manor, though, this time without the help of his GPS, much to his pride, the screen again died, and his phone wasn't much help either. He pulled through the gates, again blaming the car for its failure, never considering any other source of interruptions. At the front of the house, he takes a deep breath, savoring the feeling of freedom before he headed back into the house. Once in, he's taken aback. The house had, only hours ago, looked as if no one had lived there in years, but now, only a couple of hours later, it was a whole new place. The walls, lit by moody candelabra bulbs scattered about, were covered in rich, red, luxe-looking wallpaper, and down the hall to his left were rows and rows of identical, flickering bulbs. The paintings that stretched up the two-story wall to the upper landing were all in various dark tones, with varied subjects and sitters, all painted in deep, warm tones. The floor and ceiling opened up towards each other, covered in dark, almost black mahogany floors. To his right, the previously pitch-black sitting room was now lit by sunlight streaming through sheer curtains, and richly upholstered furniture is now revealed from under the sheets he had seen earlier. As he steps into the room, Lila's already there, now clothed in a tight black dress that had the hemline of a modest housewife from the 50s, but the neckline of a harlot from the 1600s. Thomas stands at her side, now clad in a dark button-up, black slacks, and dress shoes. Lila's heels are entirely impractical for being a housekeeper, and when she catches Warren's gaze, she smiles. I just like to dress to impress, she says with a flourish, gesturing for him to sit opposite her, a large, still unlit hallway framing her as she leaned forward. So, Warren, you are the new keeper of the house. Yes, I'm glad. Your grandfather was such a good man, but he was ready to rest, she says, pulling a teacup from the table next to her and sipping daintily. Yeah, I guess. Is there anything I need to know? Anything I need to, do? Warren asks, already in a state of unease from the 30 seconds he'd been in the room. Thomas steps forward, silently holding out a sheet of paper. Their palms brush for a split second, Thomas's rough and etched skin sending an involuntary thrill up Warren's spine, much to his internal chagrin. The paper is the same set of typed rules, with one written in pen at the bottom. The master of Wells Manor must maintain the needs of the staff, it reads. Warren makes a small puzzled sound, unsure why this was written, presumably by one of the pair across from him, when it was blatantly obvious. He looks up, catching Lila's gaze again. This last one, are there other people here besides you two? Do I need to pay you guys more or something? He asks. Lila laughs, her voice almost sinister in its intensity. Thomas's face moves for the first time at her laugh, almost a look of pain flashing across him. No, Master Wells, it's just us two. I just had Thomas add that to make sure we're taken care of. In your grandfather's last days, he neglected us a bit. We aren't paid here, we just take room and board as payment, but we just wanted to make that little addendum because we were struggling in that time and we don't want that to happen again. Don't worry, she reassures him. Warren hums, standing and looking across the room just to do something other than sit across from them. Okay, do you guys need anything right now? Do I need to get groceries, get anything for the house? What do I need to do as the new owner? Warren asks. Lila stands, moving to him and putting a red-nailed hand on his shoulder, turning him to look out a window and stare at the vast rolling lawn. Don't worry about anything, Master Wells. You know we have a well-established system. All you need to worry about now is pursuing your own passions. You have all the freedom as long as you don't leave the manor unattended, Lila says, her voice attempting to be soothing, but only succeeding in making Warren's skin crawl. He gently shrugs from her touch, and he can see the puzzled look on her face at the rejection. Cool. That reminds me, I have to return my rental car tomorrow, and I was hoping that maybe one of you could help me out. I have a permanent car arriving for me here, but I need someone to follow me so I can get home after I drop it off. Thomas? Warren asks, and Thomas looks to Lila, his expression falling just short of panic. Well, actually, Thomas and I would be happy to take care of that for you in the morning. No need to bother yourself with such things now. You have us at your service. Just remember that they must drop your vehicle off at the gate. We can't let the townspeople know about this place, you know, Lila says. Warren isn't comfortable with this idea, but he nods, knowing that he wasn't gonna get his way between the two of them. Splendid. Thomas will show you to your room if you'll allow him to get your bags, Lila says. No bags to get. It's just me for right now, Warren tells her, and she nods confusedly, but remains composed as she gestures for Warren to follow. As he follows Thomas, he notes that as they go deeper and deeper into the house, the walls and paintings, they all seem to shimmer and twitch in the darkness of the old lighting. He chalks it up to the tiny bulbs and lack of windows in the massive structure. Hallway after hallway he follows, until finally Thomas stops in front of a massive double door and throws them open with a creak. This way, Master Wells, he says, showing Warren into a bedroom so gaudy that he almost laughs out loud. The giant bed is covered in a deep blue and black brocade, stacked with high pillows. Matching wallpaper adorns the walls, each piece of needlessly ornate furniture made of the same black-brown wood. The room is just as heavy as the sitting room had been when it was shrouded, but this room was just as dark, completely staged and lit. There's a suite attached through that door, complete with dressing room, bathroom, and closet. Down the hall out here, you can reach your office, several more suites, as well as corridors to the kitchen and the dining room, Thomas explains in his monotone voice, gesturing about the room. Warren notices the muscles of his neck flexing as he speaks, and he feels that flutter in his chest. He has two realizations at the same time. He asks of the more polite one first. Thomas, what's the Wi-Fi password? I don't have signal out here, he asks. Thomas looks perplexed. Why fight? He asks. Warren fights the urge to laugh. No, the Wi-Fi, internet. I just want to let my friends know that I'm okay, he says, and Thomas nods. I don't know. I'll ask my mother and we'll let you know at dinner, if that's okay, Master Wells, Thomas says, and Warren nods before asking his second question. You can call me Warren, Thomas. I actually prefer it. Last question, and I'll get out of your hair. Are there any clubs or maybe bars around a nearby city or something, somewhere where I can meet people? He asks, unwilling to come out and say that he was looking for the closest bars and hookup spots. Thomas scratches his head, his bicep pressing at his sleeve and again reminding Warren that he was all alone out here, and that he would need to find replacements for his usual outlets sooner rather than later. I don't really go out, Master Warren. I wouldn't really know, Thomas says. Warren cocks his head. A strapping guy like yourself? There's no local watering holes you like to go to when you want to cut loose? Warren tries to dance the line between getting the information he wanted and endearing himself to his new employee. While Thomas was sort of cute, he wasn't exactly Warren's type, and he could still hear his father's voice in the back of his head. Don't shit where you eat, he heard him say when he was young, around a corner. He would repeat it to himself when he was alone and giggle at the bad words until one day Roz caught him and he was punished handsomely for his potty mouth. When his dad had heard what he'd been saying, he had a rare moment of parental nature, and he sat Warren down explaining the phrase and telling him that it was a good thing to remember, but that he couldn't say it. Warren only had a few fond memories of his father, and that was one that stuck. So he often heard it in the back of his head when he felt the urge to entangle himself with someone too close to his actual life. I don't know, honestly, Thomas says, the first hint of emotion in his voice. Sadness. Well, maybe someday you and I can go out. Maybe find a place, Warren says, trying to smile charmingly as Thomas steps out of the room, pulling the door shut behind him. I will fetch you for dinner. It's served at 7 p.m., he says as the door clicks shut. Warren feels supremely tired the moment he's alone, even at the early hour, and even more he feels drained. The feeling is crushing, so close to his grandfather, seeing these people that knew him every day until he died. His instinct was to shut it all out and sleep. He'd done it since he was a kid. Stress and anxiety triggered exhaustion in him. When he lays down on the surprisingly scratchy duvet, his eyes are shut before he can kick his shoes off and crawl under the blankets. Okay, we're back. It's regular me now. I don't know. Again, I'm looking over here. Let me move you up here. If you're just listening to the audio version of this means nothing to you. Okay, I moved you up so I can see myself and you because that's what's important. So, Warren has now met Thomas and Lila, the caretaker and gardener of the house, I guess you could say. I think their jobs are pretty interchangeable, except one of them probably is better at cooking than the other, just because the other one, as we'll find out, spends most of his time outside. But we don't know that yet. Well, I guess now we do know it. We've met Thomas and Lila. They're a little weird, but I think it kind of fits with the theme of this really old house that nobody really lives in, or it seems like nobody lives in, that it's just this like Norman and Norma Bates type situation where they're kind of just hiding in this old house alone, taking care of it. That's kind of the idea here, at least initially. Again, I say initially because it's subject to change, but we'll figure that out. This chapter is, I'm not going to say I like it because I say that every time. Let me instead say, here are some things I did in this chapter that I either am proud of or that I'm trying to get better at. So in this chapter specifically, I wasn't super heavy in the description of the words, the description of the rooms and words, but I want to try and get better at setting the tone of a room that a character's in. Like, this is a spooky story, so I want to get better at making the rooms feel spooky just in their description. I also, when it comes to character dialogue and them talking back and forth, I'm trying to get a little bit better about just, they say what they're saying, and then afterwards it's just either something completely unrelated or related to it, but it's not so descriptive about how they said it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I tend to be a little bit too flowery with my language. At least I've been told that sometimes, and sometimes people like it. But like, let me just pick something here. Okay. I don't really go out, Master Warren. I wouldn't really know, Thomas says. I always kind of have to fight the inclination to say, like, Thomas says with a look of longing in his eyes, and just cut it down to Thomas says, because it's not necessary for every single sentence that comes out of a character's mouth to be like earth-shattering or groundbreaking. So I'm trying to get better at that, and I think I'm doing a little bit better just looking at it. You let me know though. Something else that I kind of like is this idea that Warren has a plan in his mind when he gets to West Virginia, and the minute he gets there, the plan goes out the window. Initially, his plan is to get there, arrange for all of his stuff to be shipped, to find any incidentals he might need to get, and kind of the last thing on his list is to buy a car. But the minute he gets here and he sees this massive house that's his, and he has one issue with his rental car, which I'll talk about that in a second. He has one issue with his rental car. He's like, the first thing I have to do is go buy a car, and the first thing I'm going to do is go buy a $75,000 Jeep. I just think that speaks kind of to what his character actually is, which is not the so down to earth, settled, okay with anything type of character that he wants to be. And it's more apparent that the minute he sees the house that's his, that's so grand and ridiculous, he wants to buy a car that matches. Here's a couple of things I'll say about the car, and this is something that's just kind of a pet peeve of mine as an insurance appraiser. He says this thing, piece of shit domestic, when he slaps the dashboard of the car, right? That is such, to me at least, such a sign of like entitlement and kind of, I don't want to say like new or old money, but it just a weird flex kind of in a way, right? Because if it's a rental car, first of all, it's going to be a pile of shit. Like, rental cars suck notoriously, but for him to slap it and say piece of shit domestic, as if some domestic cars aren't perfectly good cars, I think it's interesting. And you also think about his car that was his car before this Jeep. He drives a 1994, but it's a 1994 Acura, which is considered a luxury vehicle. Don't get me started on Acuras. But it's considered a luxury vehicle. So even in him trying to be down to earth, trying to be salt of the earth, trying to be connected to the poor people around him, he's still pretending. Does that make sense? He's still not even pretending. He's still falling into the trap of money. He's still reaching for that little bit of luxury so that people know that he could do better if he wanted. He chooses not to. The way that he acts with the car, I think, is a good indication of that. And even the way in which I, as the narrator, or the narrator themselves, if you want to be more general about it, the narrator himself says, let me scroll back up here. When he's shopping for the car with Rodney. Sorry, my chinchilla decided now is the time to start running around. When he's looking at the Jeep, right? He's looking over the leather and everything, and the narrator says, let's see, where is it at? Here it is. So it says, instead, the younger man shrugs, walking towards it, holding in his drool as he looked at the massive touchscreen, the brilliant paint, and impeccable leather. He had to keep in mind it was still a Jeep. That's also something that I think is very funny, just as a kind of nod to what kind of character he is or how he thinks. It's a Jeep. Okay, Jeeps are nice cars. I don't personally like them that much, but Jeeps are nice cars. People really like them. Number two, it's a $75,000 Jeep. So like a fifth of his money almost automatically is gone, right? It's just gone. He just throws it away on this car, and that's a quarter or a fifth or whatever of his income for the year. And he just throws it because he realizes that what he has is so much that he can do that sort of thing. He immediately falls into this sort of flawed, flippant way of treating money. And I think that goes kind of to show that I'm working on creating characters that aren't quite so perfect, that have flaws or not perfect qualities, because the characters I've created in the past, a lot of times they're so perfect that it's like, what? It's okay for them to be perfect, but I wanted to work on a character that's not perfect. So I think that just adds to the intricacy of his character. The same thing when he's talking about, can you have it delivered? Just so casually, can you have my new car delivered? I can't be bothered to drive it off the lot. Not anything other than, can you have it delivered? I think that's very interesting. It's also interesting that when he steps into the house, after he sees it kind of unveiled with everything uncovered, he's looking up and the narrator says it's bigger than anything he'd seen in his family home. I don't know about you. I originally come from the West Coast, moved to the South as a transplant. I've never heard anyone really refer to their house as their family home unless it's some massive structure, like a giant farmhouse on a bunch of land for like a very rich family. I've never really heard that. So I'm trying to choose language or choose narration that, even though it's not the character speaking it, it still gives notes, gives hints to what the character actually is like. So that's what I like about this chapter. Now, we're only in chapter 2. There's going to be lots more chapters, so it gets more exciting as the mystery starts to unfold. But right now, we're still figuring out that there's a mystery, right? He's only been here for a day. I'm going to pick up the pace as we get through more chapters, because the story's not going to take place over like 2 weeks. It's hopeful that it takes place over a longer period of time, because it would be good for me, for the story that I'm writing, for the idea that I have. But I really like where it's going so far. Big shocker there, not me reading it to you at 8:15 at night. Still have to edit everything, but we'll do that tomorrow. No, we can't do that tomorrow because it's Wednesday. But that's what I really like about this chapter is what I'm trying to work on, which is giving the narrator kind of permission, me, the narrator, the permission to make commentary on the character while not writing it as if it's the first person. Do you know what I mean? Not thinking the thoughts for the character, but having the narrator talk about things as the main character should or would, as well as describing it and creating a more interesting environment around the characters. Besides that, the other thing that I want to work on that I haven't really, there's nothing I can really do about it other than just make funny voices, which I tried for Rodney, and I don't think it was great, but we only see him this once, so it doesn't really matter. Is the voices for characters, right? Because I'm not a voice actor. I never claimed to be. That's not my job. But it's hard to read things, and my voice is fairly monotonous when I read, just because it's a lot of pace. I'm reading 5,000-6,000 words in a sitting, even though I have to cut parts out where I mess up. But it's kind of hard to differentiate a voice and not make it sound like a weird imitation. Does that make sense? Like, if I talk way up high like this when I'm in Lila's voice, that just sounds funny. Like, it doesn't really read as like, this is me speaking as a feminine person. It just kind of reads as weird, like a weird character. I think it's more distracting to try and give everybody a unique voice or a unique accent, rather than just read it as it's written. And some advice I got from my friend Jessica, who listens, which was, you need to treat your audience as if they're smart enough to put things together. Because she said one of the things that kind of annoyed her or bugged her, which I agree, was that in the last story, when large passages of time would go by, like in between two scenes, when we were kind of speeding up travel to get it over with, and that's not fair. I like it, but get it over with. I was ready to move on. I would play that little Sputnik tone, that little beep beep beep, and she said, why do you do that? And I said, just to signal like a passage of time. And she said, why? If the person is listening actively, they can put that together for themselves. You have to treat your listeners or your readers like they're smart enough. I said, well, I'm sure my readers and listeners are smart enough. I was just making it easier. And she said, well, I guess technically that would make it easier, but it's also so distracting that you spend more time thinking about why you would do it in the first place, rather than just not doing it and giving your audience the 0.5 seconds it takes to just put it together. So that's how I'm treating the editing of this, because in the last one I also was making multiple voice tracks and taking, David and Nate and I'm already losing their names, David and Nate and Matt and Allie and all of their voices, and putting them in separate tracks with different like themes or tones or pitches, so that you could differentiate that it was a different voice, when in reality I don't think I really need to do that for you, the reader, or the listener, or the watcher, reader, listener, or watcher, to understand. If you're watching it, you can just see it scrolling past, and if you're kind of actively listening, I think most of it's pretty self-explanatory. And I do try and at least kind of change the cadence of my voice or leave pauses so that something has happened, and you put it together pretty easily. It's like an audiobook. Audiobooks, when I listen to them, a lot of times when they're narrated and different characters speak, the narrator is still speaking in their voice. Sometimes they'll do an accent, sometimes they won't. It just depends. I can't do that. And I also can't afford to hire a voice actor for every episode. So it's what we got, Gail. It's what we got. In other news, just a little bit unrelated, we're not getting excited. But in other news, last week I did receive an email from a publisher because I copyrighted? We just call it love. And when you copyright it, I think it goes to the library. There's like a whole process for copywriting. They have a complete manuscript, but I think publishers can kind of just get snippets of it. And a publishing company reached out and was like, hey, we read a part of your story. We'd like to read the whole thing and see if it's a good fit for publishing in the mainstream. Because I've already published through Kindle and it didn't work very well. I mean, if you want to go get it on Kindle before the price gets jacked up, you can. It's on Kindle. Publishing through Amazon Direct is kind of very difficult. But they reached out. So I sent them my manuscript and I told my dad and he told me it was a scam. And then he said, they're just going to ask you for a bunch of money and steal it. And then I heard back from the publishing house and they had approved my story. And I thought, that's great. And I had to call with an agent or a representative or an advisor or whatever you would call her. And she sent me over a proposal. And indeed, publishing costs a lot of money. And what I learned very quickly, not just from them, but for anyone publishing, is when you're a writer now, typically, just any person who walks off the street and who is a good writer and wants to be a writer or an author or wants to publish the things they've written, you don't get paid to do that. You pay to be an author. You pay on the good faith that what you've written is good enough to sell enough copies to make the money back. And that's what I found out. That's tough. And I'm really sitting here thinking about the opportunity is there to follow my dream. Because it is my dream, even though I hate saying that because I don't think I'm the most talented person that deserves something like that. Or the most, I don't understand why it would be me that would be able to do something like that. So it's tough. And I'm kind of just weighing my options because number one, it's not cheap to do. And I joked with somebody I was talking to about it. I said, yeah, I hope they accept payment plans for being an author because I can't afford to be an author all at once. And that's not a joke. I mean, maybe for somebody listening, it is a joke, but the amount of money that it takes to do that is not cheap. It's not cheap. But I'll let you guys know how it goes. I'm excited. It was very not reassuring. It was very validating for a company to even reach out and say that because they don't have to. It's not like they have to. They're going to make money on it regardless, right? Because they might make money to pay their, like, they charge me a certain amount of money and it makes enough money for them to pay to create the cover and do all the editing, stuff like that. But to turn a serious profit, they can't just create flop books every single time. That's not a margin of success. They have to have some degree of competence in the story for it to be good enough for them to add it to their roster, even if it is kind of a self-publishy, kind of a hope and a prayer thing. But that's where I am. That's where I have been for a long time. So I guess this is my hope and a prayer that something goes right for me because it's been a shit year for everyone. Don't get me wrong. And I am well aware of that. And I have been, even with everything that's gone on in my life, much luckier than many people. And I recognize that, but it's been a shit time for me before the pandemic. So I guess I'm putting good vibes out there that maybe something good can happen. Something good can work. That's great. Something good could work. That's a great song. Is it Two Door Cinema Club? Go listen to it. If I can make one recommendation to you this week, other than supporting the Black Lives Matter movement and supporting basically supporting human rights at this point, which, again, reminder, there's still things like the Okra Project, for the girls, the Trans Advocacy Fund, the Black Trans Advocacy Fund. There's still lots of places you can donate. Hello, the fight's not over just because Joe Biden is going to be the next president of the United States if our current president doesn't just nuke us all. I'd also remind you to go listen to Carly Rae Jepsen's album Emotion. From start to finish, there's not a skippable track. I recommend the extended digital deluxe edition because there's 17 songs and it's fantastic. I cried today listening to it. I was so stressed out in the car, kind of making my way back into the city I live in from where I was at for work. And I hit play on the first song, and it was the strangest thing. I was so stressed out. Like, my brain was just broken, and my body was tired, and my car was tired, and I was hungry, and then I ate something, and I felt so disgusting for what I had eaten, and I hit play on that first song, and this sounds stupid, but I hit play, and I immediately started to cry. I'm driving down the freeway at 70 miles an hour, and I am crying because I don't know what this Carly Rae Jepsen's album just, it brings me such joy because it's happy. It's just happy for happy's sake for the most part, and even the sad songs or the slow songs are just such upbeat pop goodness. And I really like her because she can put out really good music and it not have to be like overly produced, overly synthesized, overly done up. And when she puts out music, people make fun of her, but I love her. So if I can make a recommendation just for your well-being, your health this week, please go listen to Emotion, the album by Carly Rae Jepsen. If I can make a second recommendation, I'm working on some Sims videos. The first one should be up pretty quick, which is the creation of Warren Wells and kind of the shell of Wells Manor. And then I'm going to do a second video, hopefully get it out this week as well, that will be the creation of at least the initial version of Lila and Thomas, the only two real other characters we're going to deal with for right now. Because, like I've said, and it bears repeating, number one, and number two, is once you figure it out, you've got it figured out. But their appearance is subject to change, so as their appearance kind of changes and shifts, we can go back, revisit them, make the changes we need to make, because it is kind of important to the story. It's a major development. So, as you can probably hear, I'm losing my voice because I've been screaming all day because of work, and then I just spent 57 minutes reading a story and talking into a mic. So I am going to go, but I'll be back next week with chapter 3. Don't know what it's called. Haven't written it yet because I am bad at time management. But until then, I have been your friendly neighborhood author, Jonathan, and this has been the Floor Rejects podcast. Now, cue the spooky witch laugh.